How's it going, people? Last year I told you the story of my first car, the Skoda Fabia Estate, which I named Skye, which was probably the best thing that's ever happened to me in terms of cars ever. I really loved and adored driving that car. I told you how I bought the car and then a whole bunch of interesting stories that happened between then and the time that it died. There are, however, some other stories that I omitted from that video which I'm going to tell you today, or at least a few of them. That includes some races with a good friend of mine, a slight police incident, an ex-girlfriend breaking up with me in the car, and some crazy German man trying to kill me in the car. So yeah, all sorts of madness that happened, and let's talk about them right now. So remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that great stuff, and without further ado, let's get into the video. So one of the main reasons why I bought my Skoda Fabia Estate was so that I could drive to school. I was an upper sixth at school and it was getting a little bit annoying either having to cycle or get my parents to drive me there, so it was about time I got into a car and started driving myself. Now, being a driver at school for me was particularly helpful. It meant that we could drive to Tesco's during our lunch breaks to grab food and whatever. By the way, other supermarkets are obviously available, but it did mean that you were part of an absolutely massive competition after lunch break every single day. My school was on a road which was quite close to a station, so it had restricted parking, but in a very strange way. In the morning you could park on the left hand side of the road up until about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and then from 1 o'clock in the afternoon you could park on the right hand side of the road, but you couldn't park on either side otherwise unless you had a permit. Obviously, as school students, none of us had permits, so we always had to move our cars at the end of lunch break because our lunch is finished at 1 o'clock. So at the end of lunch, just before registration, you have to go outside, grab your car and drive it to the other side of the road. Anyone who didn't do this often risked or got tickets. But that's not the interesting part of the story. There was one perfect parking space, and I mean right at the end of the road, right next to the entrance of the school, with a perfect exit straight out onto the main road to escape from school nice and quickly. At the end of lunch, there was always an absolutely massive rush to get outside to your cars and move them and hopefully get that parking spot, or at least one of the decent parking spots towards the end of the road. If you didn't get that spot, then you were likely going to be stuck in some severe traffic trying to escape the school at the end of the day, or you just got flexed on by people who did get those parking spaces. But my best friend and I took it one step further. We had exactly the same A levels and we drove home exactly the same way until like basically the last maybe 5 minutes of the drive. And one day on the way home, we just ended up for whatever reason trying to race each other to get to where we split off. So getting to this one specific roundabout where he would go right and I would go left. It was completely unspoken. It wasn't like a, oh, let's race home kind of thing. We were just driving and we ended up side by side at a set of lights, and we then drove off from there going the exact speed limit because he had a black box in his car, and we would just literally sort of race at the speed limit along dual carriageways to try and get to that first and basically be the victor of that day. And then from that day onwards, the parking space at the end of the road became increasingly important. If you forgot to go and move your car to that parking space, you're going to lose the race home. It's simple as that. The race became a daily occurrence of racing to get your car into the correct parking spot, which meant that we were invariably the first two cars end of the road every single day, and then racing to get to your cars, get out before the other person, and then get to that roundabout before the other person too. And genuinely, this went on for ages. It was a daily occurrence, this race from school to home. Completely ridiculous, yes, probably a little bit irresponsible, even though we were sticking to speed limits, but ultimately just the kind of stupid stuff that you wanted to do in your first car. Let's jump forward now to when I was at university. So I went to University of Bath. I've mentioned it in plenty of previous videos, and on one particular occasion in my second year, things weren't going so well with my ex-girlfriend. Things had turned quite sour and it had just all gone pretty downhill, and it was time for us to end our relationship. And I got that we need to talk style text, went to collect her from the library, and then drove her down from campus back to her house. It was of course a less than enjoyable trip, but we got to the outside of her house and we then had a long conversation about what the future would hold, and basically ended our relationship there and then in the car. But that conversation went on slightly longer than I'd expected, and even though I'd remembered to turn the car off to save fuel, I hadn't turned the headlights off, so I'm pretty sure you can work out where this is going. As she was getting out of the car to go back into her house, I tried to start my car, which came with a dull thud of the engine and no turning on. I had completely drained the battery, and then I had to knock on the doors of a whole bunch of her neighbours in order to try and find someone that had some jump leads, and then a very kind man who's ex-military as well came over and helped me to jumpstart my car and then get on with driving away. But yes, maybe not the best way to finish a relationship breaking up conversation. But yes, we got the car started, I drove home a single man, I went out on the sesh that night, and the rest is history. Now, I don't know how much I can say about the next story, but staying in when I was at second year at university, a Skoda Fabia Estate was driving around the edges of Bath at around 1 o'clock in the morning, doing the speed limit, and a police car was coming in the opposite direction. As the police car came past the Skoda Fabia Estate, the blue lights came on, and the Skoda Fabia Estate proceeded to drop a gear, disappear, go down a couple of back roads, a few lefts and rights and sneaky turns, and then parked up in a random location, got out of the car, put the hood up, and then just cruised off to the friend's house. I'll let you guys fill in the gaps and the details there, but ultimately, if the police were trying to chase that Skoda Fabia Estate, they very much didn't succeed. And just for context, the Skoda Fabia Estate was actually doing the speed limit and nothing was actually bad in the situation, but yes, it was quite strange that the police car suddenly turned around, turned its lights on, and starts heading towards. I mean, the person driving didn't even think about it, just decided, nah, I don't fancy it, because in Bath, ethnic minorities haven't always had the easiest time, or at least in my experience as ethnic minority in Bath, I didn't always have the easiest time with some of the locals. So I can definitely empathise with the driver of the Skoda Fabia Estate. Moving swiftly on, you may well have seen a previous video where I discussed the fact that I drove 2,536 miles around Europe in my Skoda Fabia Estate. And while it was generally plain sailing, on the first day we did come into a little bit of a strange situation, a little bit of a scary situation almost. So we're driving through France on our first day, and we get to this part of the motorway where there's a little bit of road work, so it goes from 3 lanes down to 1 lane. I pulled over into the 1 lane that you're supposed to pull over into, maybe about 20 yards before the cones were there to kind of stop people from carrying on through. I get to literally where the cones turn it into being 1 lane, and this German registered car, this Mercedes with an absolute meathead German dude in the car with a whole bunch of tattoos, tries to somehow skirt past all of these cones and get in front of me. I was like, nah mate, you don't own the road and you certainly cannot bully the Skoda out of the way, so you can just wait. So I just carried on, held my line, stayed right behind the person in front of me and didn't let him in. To save his manhood, he tried really hard. He even drove into the cones to try and get in front of me, and I was like, nah mate, what are you doing? Just go the position behind me. Just why are you trying to cut in to this degree just to make a point? And I appreciate I was making a point with him or making an example of him, but ultimately he was in the wrong place and he was just being an unkind and an unfriendly road user. So I was like, nah, allow it. You're not just going to be that and get away with it. I think I might have slightly impacted his manhood because he started beeping me from behind, weaving left and right, and then as soon as we got out of the little 1 lane section back into 3 lanes again, he drove in front of the car, started waving loads of hand signals at me and shouting out with the car, trying to like get my attention, going in front of the car and weaving and then braking randomly really hard in front of me, trying to basically cause a crash or cause me to pull over. He was trying to basically signal for me to go and pull over into the side, but this dude's a proper meathead, and despite the fact that I've got myself, one of my best mates, and my girlfriend in the car, I still don't necessarily want to get into a fight on the side of a French motorway with some next random meathead German dude. So I evaded his many lefts and rights and calls for me to pull over for no apparent reason, just literally to have a fight on the side of the motorway. And by the way, let's just point out, he had his wife and kids in the car as well. They're probably pretty distressed at this point that he's being such a insert expletive here. And yeah, I mean, it was just a ridiculous thing. What a poor example he was setting to his kids, and he was putting like 8 people's lives in danger. This carried on for literally like 2 or 3 miles, so I basically maneuvered myself so that I was behind a different car and he was in front of that car, and he didn't really have anywhere to go to try and get at me. We got to a slip road which I stayed really far left on, so I moved myself out of the way so that I wasn't going to go down the slip road, and he came across to try and get to me, and then at the last minute, whilst I had some space, I ducked straight back across, went right up the slip road, and then disappeared off into the distance so that he couldn't find me. I basically just pulled some absolutely scatty maneuvers so that he couldn't catch up, and whilst he carried on the motorway, I disappeared off down the slip road, waited like 5 minutes, drove back out again. And as I was driving along, I actually saw him in a service station on his phone looking very angry, and just, yeah, I had no idea what the guy was doing. But yeah, I would highly recommend you don't put people's lives at risk because you got your ego hurt. The final story is actually one that I've told before, so it's not a completely untold story, but I never really told you it in depth. I was in Surrey visiting my girlfriend a few years ago, just after I'd actually come back from that holiday. We'd gone to the cinema in Guildford to see some kind of film. I can't remember what it was at this point, probably a Marvel film, knowing what I would have gone to see with my girlfriend. Jumped into the car, it was late at night, and we start driving away towards this roundabout which has 3 lanes going around it, so quite unusual. The right hand lane signals to go all the way back around the roundabout and go back on yourself, and the left 2 lanes either go straight or they turn right. We were behind a really slow driver in a Fiat 500, and I had no idea what she was doing, but I was in the far left hand lane because that's the correct lane if you're not overtaking someone, just to turn right at that roundabout. As we went into the roundabout, she looked really nervous. She didn't have any indicators on, so I thought she was maybe going to go straight, but then she last minute decided to turn right, and then at the very last minute decided to turn all the way around the roundabout despite still being in the left hand lane. However, she decided this a little bit too late. As I had moved across into the middle lane to also turn right and not go the whole way around the roundabout, she basically turned directly into the back of my car. Fortunately, I sort of expected it because of how badly she was driving, and so manoeuvred my car when I saw that she was turning into me to make sure she hit into the back of me, because obviously if any insurance claims happen, if you hit into the back of someone, it's generally your fault. We then pulled over into the Waitrose car park. Of course it was Waitrose because it's Surrey, and then she got out looking very flustered and very scared, and I just said, "Shall we leave it there?" And she said yes, and we both got back into our cars and drove off. And my girlfriend was in the car at the time, obviously, because we just come out of the cinema, and she was very shaken up, but in reality nothing really bad happened to the car. You can see a few pictures here of what actually happened to the paint on the car. I would have had to have got it painted or whatever, but ultimately it was no big deal. And I have plenty more stories like this I could tell you guys if you're interested in them, or if VinWiki want to hit me up and get me on the show so I can tell a whole bunch of interesting stories about my first car. But before I finish this video, I wanted to show you guys this. How's it going, people? I wanted to show you guys a few things that I kept from the car after the crash happened. So you've probably seen the number plates before. They were in the background of some of my videos in the past, but also just before the car was taken away, I basically grabbed out a whole bunch of interesting stuff, for me at least, from the car. Some of it's uninteresting as well, like that was literally in the little tray where you put your phone and whatever. But ultimately, yeah, I just kept a whole bunch of random stuff, kept all the Skoda badges, kept a couple of things from big days out that we did, like we went to the Goodwood races. That was literally the Little Trees air freshener from the car. That's like some of the badges and whatever. That was our sticker from when we drove around Europe. I was also a member of the old National Trust in 2015, so I could park in their car parks in Bath, 1.2 HTP, just all this kind of random stuff that I kept for literally no reason. But yeah, I just wanted to show you guys that because obviously cars do have a big impact on lots of people's lives, and people who really like cars, they end up loving them to some degree, and I really loved my Skoda. So yeah, just thought I'd show you all the stuff that I kept as basic memories, I suppose. Anyway, as always, a massive thank you to the patrons. Thanks to you guys for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that great stuff, and I'll see you in the next one.